Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any arm.
Welcome to Eradicating Programmed Ignorance, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. This is episode number 3. And today, I decided not to have a guest because there's something I want to talk to everybody about, and that's perspective. Today is my 61st birthday, and it is also the 3rd birthday of the Liberty Beacon Project, which was founded on August 19th, 2012. Now, some people out there might say, well, the Liberty Beacon website was around before then. Yes, it was. And it was originally launched just as a single website. When we decided to go to multiple formats, being radio shows and eventually a television show, and multiple websites and multiple partner sites, then we launched what was called the Liberty Beacon Project. And that was launched on August 19th, 2012. So today, we're not only celebrating my 61st birthday, we're celebrating the 3rd birthday of the Liberty Beacon Project. And today, we're going to talk about something that I think not too many people are aware of. And if you're aware of it, it doesn't really come forward in your mind as much as it should. And again, that's the word perspective. And perspective is basically defined as the faculty of seeing all the relevant data in a meaningful relationship. And I don't mean in a personal relationship. I mean data in relation to other data. A perspective is being able to step back and looking at all that is unfolding in front of you and coming up with a flow, coming up with a concept, coming up with an idea of what is happening. So I'm going to go through, and you'll all have to excuse me because I do have some post-nasal drip. I do have the beginnings of a cold, a raspy throat. So please bear with me. If I do a bit of coughing on this show, I apologize in advance. But what we're going to go through today is 3 generations of perspective. Now, a lot of people don't remember back when they were very, very young. I'm a fortunate individual. I can remember breaking my arm at 2 years old. I can remember my grandfather taking me to the hospital because we had been hit by, above all things, a garbage truck in a car accident. And as my grandfather took me to the hospital, I remember him telling me, the police are going to get those evil men and they're going to hang them off the bridge by their toes. Now, I was 2 years old when this happened. So I'm saying 3 generations of perspective, or 60 years, because when you're from 0 to 1 years old, even the best of us can't really remember anything. But I do have a very good sense of long-term memory. So I have seen what has happened in the United States and globally over the last 3 generations. I don't necessarily consider myself to be the smartest individual around, but I do give myself some credit for intellect. I do have the ability to step back from the picture and put the pieces together and formulate a cohesive flow. This today is going to be my perspective, or at least the first part of it. Excuse me. As soon as we get done with my perspective, we're going to jump into a global perspective, but the main focus is going to be on America. Because as most of you have heard before, although a lot of you won't understand it or don't understand it, where goes America goes the world. And this is true on so many levels. And that doesn't mean we're the greatest. That doesn't mean we're the most important. That means that we are the trend setters of the world and have been for the 3 generations we're going to be discussing today. So the focus will be on America. The first part of this presentation is going to be an article that I wrote when I was 50 years old, 11 years ago. And then I updated it when I turned 60, and I updated it again to be republished with this show. The reason I'm, excuse me, I told you about this. The reason I'm going to be covering this is because it is so apropos. It gives a step-by-step, blow-by-blow description. And is this, well, I won't get into that right now. Let's go through a couple of key points before we actually start going through this article. And once the article's done, we're going to take it to the next level. So I want you all to ask yourself, why is it that the majority, but certainly not all of, the awake individuals in this country are right around 50 years old or older? And if you stop and think about that, and all your friends on social media, and all of your friends that preach and scream and holler and rant and educate, you're going to find that this really serious awakening, this serious involvement starts at the age of about 45, screams up till you get to 50, peaks at about 60, okay? Or what we would call the baby boomers. Well, let me give you a hint. We have the ability, or we have the sense of perspective. We have seen enough happen and enough change to develop this perspective. And this perspective is well developed. So why is the youth in America so tied into the programming? They don't have this perspective. They haven't been around long enough to develop this perspective. Not any long-term perspective. And I'll get into that a little bit deeper. Okay. Is what you're being told via the MSM, in fact, programming? A lot of you out there are immediately answering yes, but to what degree? Again, we'll touch on that today. Why is the world news such a small part of our mainstream media reporting as the world burns around us? And I mean that literally. There are issues happening all across this planet today. And if you look at your mainstream media news, there is a mention here, a mention there. If you watch the news in Great Britain, if you watch the news in Germany, if you watch the news in Australia, it's totally different than the news we get in America. So is it programming? Why is world news such a small part? Again, something we'll get into a little bit more as this conversation develops. Why does the rest of the world mourn we the people's ignorance? I will blatantly tell you, and I dare anybody to push back against this, the American people are the most ignorant society on this planet when it comes to the machinations of our own government, the how, why, and wherefore of our governance. And if you think that that is a mistake or an accident, you couldn't be more wrong. And the world does look at Americans, the American society, we the people, and they think to themselves, they do, or they say to people like me who have spent a good deal of their life traveling this world in the job I was doing for the DOD, one of the biggest questions, or one of the first questions I get, is why are Americans so ignorant? Now, let's not confuse ignorance with stupidity. Excuse me. I, for one, do not think Americans are stupid, although they're doing their damnedest to dumb us down. And that's another show altogether. But are we ignorant? A vast majority of Americans are so ignorant of what is going on around them. This is what is facilitated and precipitated the fall or the decline in the greatness of America in several areas. Again, something we will get into a little bit more today. But let's start this off with a quote. In 1981, the director of the CIA, William Casey, stated, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." Is false. They don't want you to know. what's happening. They don't want you to know because they don't want you to gather strength, stand up, and push back. If and when the light bulb comes back on in we the people's head that we are in fact the true leaders of this country, they're in trouble. We outnumber them on such a phenomenal stage. It's insane. We the people, have the seat at the top of the totem pole. And those seats in those bleachers have been absconded from us. And in a lot of cases, a lot of Americans have acquiesced their seats in those bleachers. And that's something else we'll get into a little bit deeper today. So now, my story, my perspective, and I'm telling you right now, it is my perspective. If you don't believe what I'm telling you, do not tell me I'm wrong, because this is not your perspective. This is my story. This is what I have seen. These are the perceptions I have. And you will find, I hope, a lot of you, excuse me, especially those of you 45 years old or older, will find a lot of common points in what I'm about to present to you. But if it's not your perspective, don't discount it, because I'm not ignorant. I'm not stupid. I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree, but I guarantee you I've done enough research and I've seen enough things to give you a decent perspective, okay? It's not all inclusive, hell no, but it is comprehensive enough to spot the obvious trends. More on that as we continue. So again, the topic of today's show, 3 generations of perspective, my perspective. You see, everything needs perspective. How did we get here? Perspective allows us to see the difference of then and now over an extended period. Something hard to see when change is slow and measured in several generations. Personal perspective also has the ability to cancel out, or at least allow us to dig through the rewriting of history by heavy hands of the tyrants who own and control our media via a steady flow of propaganda. Again, something we've already touched on, but it won't be the last time we bring it up. I have lived for 3 generations and would now respectfully offer my personal perspective of what I have seen transpire over this time frame. This is by no means a detailed perspective, because that would require a book, and we certainly couldn't do it in an hour's time. But it is enough to make a blatant point. For those who would disagree or push back, I would simply say, how long have you been asleep? And I truly mean that. So let's start out by naming time frames and the perspectives that I witnessed within those time frames. So let's start out from the mid-50s to 1970. And again, I was born in 1954. Understand as I continue, a lot of you are going to say, but what about? This is not intended to be a detailed perspective. This is a perspective of an individual who has seen changes. So what I'm going to do is bring up key points that facilitated these changes in American politics, American society, and American freedom. I can remember as a youngster, people would talk about millionaires as if they were somehow supernatural with all the money in the world. I can still hear my father telling me that if he had $1 million in the bank, he could live comfortably off just the interest for the rest of his life without ever having to touch the principal. So let's put this into perspective. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, when this was would have happened, when my father would have told me this, you could be getting interest anywhere from 4 to 5%. So let's take 5% just as an average figure. If you put $1 million in the bank and you're drawing 10% on it, that's $100,000 a year. If you're drawing 5%, that's $50,000 a year. This is back when school teachers were barely making $5,000 a year. So if you're making $50,000 a year in interest payments on $1 million, you're living as a very wealthy individual, well above upper middle class. Even today, because we've come full circle, whereby the cost of living and the standard of living for what we term the middle class, which truly doesn't really exist the way it used to anymore, $50,000 is a very decent living. Everybody who wanted a job had one. Supporting a family on a one income was doable with reasonable comfort. Welfare and unemployment were still a problem of the future. Social Security was paid into a special fund that the government was not to touch. Yeah, okay. Yeah, to be available as a safety net when you retired. If the government ran a deficit in the tens of millions of dollars, my parents would have freaked out and wondered where this country was headed. And $1 billion was a number the average citizen couldn't conceive of in its immensity. America was loved and admired across the world. This was the place to be, to raise children, to dream. The people were proud and they were happy. Now let's move to the next time frame, 1970 to 1990. Again, my personal perspective. I enlisted in the Navy at 17 years of age. A sizable portion of this nation rails against one war, Vietnam, and forces the government to hear us. Millionaires were not that uncommon, and the term billionaire was still just creeping into our vocabulary. I can remember a local radio talk show host saying that a new millionaire was created in this country every 3 days. Wow, who would have thought? We suffered through a choreographed oil shortage. Yes, I said choreographed, and yes, we'll expound on that a little later. So we suffered through a choreographed oil shortage that forced us to economize our vehicles and our homes. The average Joe had a good paying manufacturing job and enjoyed a decent lifestyle. If we ran a multi-billion-dollar deficit, the government said it was good for the economy, and I can actually remember that being said. The military-industrial complex and pharmaceutical industry were just beginning, to buy massive influence and flexing their newfound political power. Billionaires were the new gods of money, and we were starting to realize wielded some serious political clout. This was the beginning of the me generation, and the people were cautious. Now, next time frame, 1990 to 2000. I was working for the military-industrial complex, making great money and helping to arm every nation and faction with weapons, ally or not, these companies or our government could sell to them. The term billionaire was something commonplace and familiar to the masses for the first time. A published article stated that a millionaire was created in this country every day, and money and material possessions ruled the American society. Credit was damn easy to get, and these were the decades of mass consumption. The budget was balanced for the first time in a long time, but then more and more jobs began to move overseas because labor was so cheap, and corporations began to show their true greed. And I do mean that when I say true greed. Oil and cheap products were flowing into this country at an alarming rate, building a dependency that threatened our balance of trade and our economic stability. The military industrial complex and pharmaceutical industry were making serious and deep inroads into the government, acquiring serious political clout and favor, all without the average citizen having much of a clue. Again, we will go into that much deeper at the end of this article. And now the people are concerned. 2000 to 2010, our next time frame. We survived the doomsday event of Y2K. And I say that with a chuckle because at the time I was running my own little computer company in Narragansett, Rhode Island. And every business owner would look to me to keep their computers up and running. And every single one of them, due to the propaganda that had been put out, was freaking out about Y2K. Their computers falling offline and the world ending. Again, we survived the doomsday event of Y2K. Again, I was running my own little computer consulting firm and scratching to make ends meet. Millionaires were commonplace and no big deal. Billionaires were plentiful and credit was cheap. The housing bubble bursts. Bam! Intentionally. Yes, I said that. And if you do some research, you'll find that out. And wiped out a lot of the average Joes, the semi-well-to-do, and many of the then common millionaires. More and more of the common folk were out of work. Getting another job meant settling for less because now you're competing as a 45 or a 50-year-old person with someone right out of college, somebody with a brand new education and eager to conquer the world. So in order for you to continue working and supporting your family in your mid-40s, you had to settle for less. And this started the downward spiral of what we know or knew as the middle class. Big banks were failing, but receiving bailouts for their, from their political cronies, regardless of their blatant mismanagement, while we the people fell further into debt and relative poverty. The military-industrial complex was raking in billions from multiple wars that worked to their advantage. Pharmaceutical giants were now buying government favor at a rate 5 times what even the military-industrial complex could muster. Multinational corporations now have a visible and absolute stranglehold on this government. Budget deficits skyrocketed as the government tried to buy its way out of a hole they had dug due to a push it back or kick the can down the road mentality, combined with severe cronyism and incompetence. Nearly every politician had his hand in the cookie jar, and their time in Washington was consumed with padding their retirement instead of why they were sent there in the first place. America was now officially an oligarchy, and the people are waking up. 2010 to present. I have now worked for 2 companies that have gone out of business because they can no longer compete in the global economy. More than 1 out of 5 adult males is out of work, and true unemployment, not what the mainstream media reports as stats, is over that observed in the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, the average unemployment rate was considered to be 23%. If you talk to true economists today, they will tell you that in the United States, this could be as bad today as 25 to 26%. A large portion of this demographic is either collecting long-term unemployment or some form of benefits from a government that is broke. And many are faced with very few prospects of ever regaining their past standard of living. The talk of recession turns to talk of depression as more people exhaust their unemployment benefits or give up trying to ever find gainful employment again. That is the fastest rising demographic in this country. People who are giving up. The big banks and global financiers have a great, have as great a stranglehold on this economy as the military-industrial complex and pharmaceutical industry does on our government. Our national credit rating has been lowered for the first time in history, and Washington's answer is to borrow more money or to raise the debt ceiling to heights generations to come will be severely burdened with. Congress is impotent due to severe infighting, special deal-making, and finger-pointing. And I would also throw into there complicity. We now talk about yearly deficits using the term trillions, not billions or millions. A mind-boggling number we could not even have conceived of a generation before. You can't drive through any city without seeing factory after factory closed down, abandoned due to the failure of American competitiveness, or beggars and the homeless on most street corners panhandling just to stay alive. America, once seen as a shining castle on the hill, is now looked on as an out-of-control monster, or the proverbial bully on the block. War protests are almost non-existent, even though we are involved in hostilities across the globe, both overtly and covertly, leaving millions of dead innocents in our wake. We call that collateral damage because it sounds better than murdered. A college graduate is now competing with the out-of-work professional with 30 years of experience willing to work for peanuts just to help their family survive. A full-time job with benefits is now seen as a gift from the Almighty. Our once globally admired middle class falters and shrinks. The person who has worked hard all his life has seen his pension destroyed by greedy, inept banksters, while the average Joe, who is about to retire, wonders if the Social Security fund he has paid into all his life has been so badly abused and raided by the government that it will fail him when he needs it most to survive. I found the Liberty Beacon Project to awaken the sleepers to the disintegration of America with the hope and belief that it's not too late. The people are angry. The last time frame, today. In a mere 3 generations, the blink of an eye by historical standards, I have personally watched the proudest, most powerful, and most prosperous country in the history of this planet knocked to its knees by power grabbing, greed, complicity, and gross mismanagement. And all to the benefit of a very select few. The few who call themselves the elite. I will always be proud. Understand what I'm about to say. For all of you who feel I'm just a disgruntled American, nothing could be further from the truth. Because, and remember what I'm about to say. So if you ever throw this back in my face, I will throw this line back in your face. I will always be proud, always, to be an American. But there are so many Americans today that I can never be proud of. Now, how's that for perspective? Let me explain something to you. It's up to you and I to impart the true perspective to our children. The truth, the true perspective. The one everyone in my generation knows to be the truth because, damn it, we lived through it. We saw it happen. We lived it. And the biggest fear that I have today is that our children are totally ignorant of it. This is the up-and-coming generation. This is the generation that will take over the helm of this massive ship called America. And if we don't impart this perspective to our children, I fear America is truly lost. So, this is the article I wrote. And as I told you, this article was originally written 11 years ago. And of course, it was updated excuse me, a year ago and updated a little bit more today. Because perspectives are not static. Perspectives evolve. I truly hope 5 or 10 years from now to be standing here on this show, on CCN Network, telling everybody how my perspective has changed. How the American people woke up and remembered the fact that we, the people, rule America. And we stepped back into a position we had acquiesced way too long ago. And we decided to take back a country that was always intended to be for we, the people, not the oligarchs. That's a perspective I truly wish to have. This is a perspective the Liberty Beacon Project, which is 3 years old today, is striving to impart. A perspective is not static. America is not lost. America has not failed or fallen. But we're well on that path to all three of those. Understand the power of the people of this country. Understand that it was realized over a half a century ago when Yamamoto told his emperor, I cannot attack the west coast of the United States of America, which he had been asked to do after Pearl Harbor, because there will be an American with a gun behind every blade of grass. He knew. He knew. Or when the now famous statement was uttered, I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant. This is the issue we have today. This is why my perspective will be pushed back against by so many. Because they don't look back and see all of the tripping points that my generation does. If you're 30 years old today, you do not remember America the way I do. You don't remember America the way those who fought in the Vietnam War did, because they are my generation. I went into the military in 1972. Okay? The baby boomers are my generation. We have a 3-generation perspective. Everything I have told you, and so much more I could tell you, I have witnessed. When I tell you that when I was young, America boasted ship after ship leaving ports day after day carrying American products throughout the world. We were the most competitive, the most technologically advanced society on this planet, and no one could compete. Sure, China was making cheap goods. Japan was making cheap goods back then, and they were starting to make inroads into the market, but they had to compete against Goliath, America. Nobody could produce the way America could. And today, when I tell you that you can drive through any city of size, whether it's Cleveland, Flint, Michigan, Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, and I could go on giving you city after city after city without seeing factory after factory with their doors closed down, some of them having been abandoned for decades. This is because America has lost her competitive edge. And it's not because the union says you will pay us more. It's because instead of finding more efficient ways to make the product so that these decent wages can be paid to these individuals, it's much easier for global corporations to move these factories to slave labor countries, where the average wage is $1.50 an hour, not $18 or $20 an hour. And it began happening in the 1970s, and it continues to today. The same thing happened in Great Britain. Anybody who doubts what I said just now, look at the history of Great Britain. They used to have an extremely powerful manufacturing capability. Today, it is all but gone. But how many times have you heard For those who will not look and learn from history, they are doomed to repeat it. But it's not you and I who made this mistake, because what happened as the unions and the people pushed for higher wages and better living conditions in the UK? The same thing that happened here in the United States. Those companies were moved to places where these huge oligarchs and these global corporations could make more profit by paying cheaper wages. And guess where they went? They came to America, people. They came to America. Because at that point in time, our wage was much lower. And now we are going through the exact same cycle again. 1 point. Just 1 point. That's the economic cycle. Let's talk about the military cycle. I have a perspective here that is much different than most people could ever lay claim to. Because for the first 8 years, from 1971, when I enlisted in the military, went active in 1972, for 8 years, I was in the nuclear submarine fleet. And then for about 20-something years following that, I worked for the Department of Defense. I worked for Raytheon, traveling the world, working on U.S. weapon systems, U.S. sensor systems, or whatever, and supporting the military-industrial complex. I truthfully believe that anything the U.S. did in a military aspect was necessary, was a good thing. This was back in the 70s. This was back in the 80s. Today, I look and I see a continued war of over almost 15 years now in Iraq, almost 15 years now in Afghanistan. I see the Libyan people bombed back to the Stone Age. I see the Syrian people under constant threat and massive arms pouring in to Syria, funded by either the American military or the CIA. And I could go on naming country after country, whether we're talking about the Sudan, whether we're talking about Pakistan, whether we're talking about what happened in Central and South America. Every time a people would rise up to take over their own destiny in their own country, you would have someone like Kissinger stepping forward to say, and I won't quote it exactly, we can't leave the decision up to those people. They don't know enough. We have to go in and make it right. How many nations has the American government or our intelligence agencies in Central and South America gone in and overrun by supporting dictators? You know, I talk about constantly, there's over 3 million deaths in the Middle East, and the number actually goes much higher. People are dying there today in droves. One of the biggest reasons is because we used millions upon millions of rounds of depleted uranium ammunition in these theaters of war. Shock and awe. Remember that? How many Americans stood up and cheered? Shock and awe. All right. We went in and bombed Baghdad back to the Stone Age. How many of those people ever had it within their power to threaten or wished harm on America? If you knew the truth, it would shock the hell out of you. So we've got tons upon tons of depleted uranium ammunition still laying all across their countryside. Birth defects out the butt, stillbirths, cancers, whatever. That's just one mechanism. I could name a lot more. The death toll in the Middle East is beyond what you can comprehend, and damn sure well above what your government's telling you. And I never lie, and I never exaggerate. I just say things with angst and bravado. And I say them with bravado because I know what the hell I'm talking about. My perspective, but still the truth. When I say millions, have died in the Middle East and continue to die today for the oligarchs, not for you and me. How many of us, how many people listening to this show? Raise your hand. No, just kidding. Can't see your hand. But how many of you would raise your hand if I said, hey, are you for this? If you truly knew the actual death toll. How many of these people have no home to go home to? Because we've literally bombed their homes, their schools, their hospitals, their factories, their shops. Back to the Stone Age. How many? How many of you would support this? How many of us supported this during the Vietnam War? Millions of Americans rose up because of one war. One. Not the dozen or so that are going on covertly or overtly across this planet right now. One damn war. One. And we rose up en masse, and we told our government, bullcrap. We're not putting up with this. You need to back the hell off. And anybody who doesn't believe we had an influence, you're wrong. History has been rewritten for you to believe we didn't have an impact, because we sure the hell did. And how bold were Americans? I remember, because it was right down the street from me. Well, not right down the street, but geographically speaking, because I lived in Lorain, Ohio at the time. I remember Kent State in Ohio, where protesting students were shot for protesting their beliefs. Search your soul. Search your memory. When is the last time you saw a war protest in this country? I'm going to tell you, you can't remember. Why? Because we have all been programmed. And when I say we, I talk about the majority of Americans, not every American. I know there are many of you out there who truly understand what I'm saying. Have been propagandized to believe that everybody who lives in a geographical region called the Middle East is our enemy and they must die. Can you truly believe that? Can you truly believe that? When your government tells you that between 95 and 98% of all of the deaths, I'm not making this up, Google it. 95 to 98% of all of these deaths were collateral damage. Meaning people who weren't supposed to die, they were just there when the drone missile hit, or the bomb fell from the sky, or the attack squad came in spraying bullets so thick they formed a wall of lead. Stop and think about what I just said. 95 to 98%. And for all of those who are a little slow, and that's a joke, please don't take it personally, that means if you kill 100 people, 98 of them never should have died. They didn't do anything wrong. They are collateral damage. I spent a good chunk of my life traveling this world. I did that. It's a fact. But when I was traveling the world, because I haven't done that since right about the turn of the 21st century. That's when I quit working for the military-industrial complex. But when I was traveling the world, we still had a good enough reputation that Americans were welcomed anywhere, especially when I started doing it in the early 80s. People were happy to see Americans. They crowded around you. They wanted to talk. They wanted to know what's it really like to live in America. They could sit for hours and listen to a conversation from me, and I was only too happy to tell them. Flash forward. What do you think I get when I talk to all of the great individuals involved in the Liberty Beacon Project, a part of the Liberty Beacon Project in Australia, in Finland, in the Middle East, in the UK, and I could go on. What do you think I get when I talk to them today? What do you believe the perception of America is today? I honestly want you to think about that for a second, because if you believe we're still looked at as the shining castle on the hill, Camelot, the place to go to for freedom and to make a decent living, you're wrong. We're the bully on the block. We are the 800-pound gorilla. And in a lot of places, we are hated. Okay, why are we hated? Why are there so many terrorists on the planet today? And I'm delving into dangerous territory, and I really don't give a damn. Because this is my perspective. And if you don't like it, I dare you to tell me where it's wrong. In the 1950s, when we went into Iran and literally deposed the government that was supported by the people and installed the Shah, that started a chain reaction of events that has accelerated throughout recent history. The United States has stuck its nose into the Middle East over and over and over again. And if you think it is to keep terrorists from coming to America, nothing could be further from the truth. It is for strategic position. It is for sweet crude. It is to build pipelines. It is for everything but what you are being told. It's for opium. Yeah. I say that and I chuckle because anybody who doesn't know and hasn't seen the pictures, try Googling this, okay? U.S. military forces protecting poppy fields in Afghanistan. So here we go, 1950s on. We start to kill a massive amount of people in the Middle East. This accelerates in the last part of the 20th century with the first Gulf War, and then accelerates at an insane rate at the beginning of the 21st century with our invasions of sovereign nations, Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, how many people did I just tell you we killed? Now, a lot of you will say, well, hell, they were terrorists. We had to kill them. How many people did I just tell you were collateral damage? Now, if my mother is shopping, okay, in the middle of town, and a missile comes down and kills her and everybody around her, never thought about America, never really enters her consciousness hardly at all, that's a world away, and she dies, or my sister dies, or my father dies, or my mother dies, or whatever, my wife dies. What do you think that's going to do to me? I want to hear your perspective on that. How are you going to think of America? How are you going to think of America when your family is taken down as, quote unquote, collateral damage? Tell me. You're going to do something that just about anybody in that predicament or that situation would do. You're going to swear that if it takes you for the rest of your life, you're going to find a way to pay these people back for what they did. And now you're a terrorist. Now let's take a look at the between 3 and 4 million that have been killed in the Middle East since the turn of the 21st century. Let's take a look at how many million more have been crippled for life or maimed for life. Let's say this number easily bumps up on 5 million. How many uncles? How many mothers and fathers? How many husbands or wives? How many sisters or brothers or nephews or nieces do you think these 5 million people have? You want to know where terrorists come from? And I say this purely in a, I don't know, hypothetical situation, but you'll understand what I mean. If you truly want to understand where terrorists come from, look in the mirror. They come from America. Not born in America, not raised in America, but created by America. Because prior to us sticking our nose into the Middle East, no terrorist threat to this country existed. None. Zero. Zip. It didn't happen. You never heard about it. When did you start hearing about it? Let's go back to perspective. When did you start to hear about terrorism? Gee, maybe right about after the first Gulf War, late 90s, you might have heard the word. But then all of a sudden, the 21st century dawns and we storm into the Middle East in force with all our weapons of wonder and mass destruction. And we produce shock and awe. And now they're dying by the millions, and every other day, what do you hear from this government on every single mainstream media broadcast with very few exceptions? What do you hear? What is the most common word uttered by the propaganda machine today? What is it? Gee, that would be either terrorism or terrorists. How wrong, you know, I look at this and I wonder myself, okay? I wonder myself if we're going to reach enough people, and this is a selfish thought, so that 5 years or 10 years from now, I can look back with a different perspective. I don't blame Americans for what is happening. I don't. Because I truly believe, as does most of the rest of the world, that America is the most ignorant society on the planet. But that ignorance has been instilled from our schools. It has been instilled from our media. It has been instilled by our entertainment. It has been instilled by our government. Anybody running for office, what's the most common word you ever hear from them? Economy and terrorists. Who's responsible for the terrorism? The same people. Who's responsible for the economy? The same people. And as Americans, we, the biggest, I don't know, what is the litmus test of a generation? Will my children be able to live as good a life as I did? Will my children be able to enjoy all the rights and freedoms I did? Will my children, okay? It's always about will my children. If you take that as a litmus test today, we are the most failing generation in the history of this country. Because economically, there's no way in hell, the way things are going, they're ever going to live a better life than us. And the way our rights and freedoms are being usurped on a daily basis, anybody who thinks that's bull, I dare you to prove me where I'm wrong on that. I really do. So we're failing at that litmus test, failing dramatically. So what is our task at this point? We, my generation, the baby boomers, need to ensure that our children and our grandchildren are made aware of our perspective because it is unique. We have had 3 generations to look and see what has happened to America. Everything we railed about 3 generations ago is normal in this country today. It's normal. And those 40 years young or younger are severely ignorant of it because they haven't seen the changes we have. So my challenge to everybody out in the audience that's 50 years or older is to sit down with your children. Sit down with your grandchildren and pass on your perspective. Not the rewritten history they're taught in school, the perspective you lived. It's invaluable. It is. The only thing that will overcome the lies and the propaganda is our perspective. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want you all to understand that I do appreciate you watching this show. It's due to networks like this that I can stand in front of you and scream for an hour every single week. I wish you all a very, very pleasant evening. And again, all of you my age, please remember your perspective. It's key to the survival of America. Have a great evening, everybody.